Hello, everyone. We are live on this Monday in the bowels of the Southbrook building. You can't get there from where you are right now. We are so glad you're with us. We beg for you to give us questions, which you did last week. And this week, we're going to try to answer those. Next half hour, we need more, very possibly, of your questions for this episode of the Weekend Hangover. And we are so glad to have the Laura Buffington with us as usual here on Weekend Hangover with Chuck. We're in part 2 of Heaven, part 8 of Blood Beast Bowls and Bowls Predictions, our Revelation series, which instead, what's that?
Are you excited to close it out?
I was ready to be done. I'm glad we didn't do 9 weeks. I was glad to be done with 8. It was enough. I just felt like I gave people a reason to at least read Revelation. And
a lot of people have. So many people I talked to week 1. I don't do Revelation. I just too much blood or whatever reason. And it's so encouraging to talk to so many people now. It started happening usually around 5-6 weeks in that, hey, I've been reading it, or hey, I've been doing the message version, or friends of mine, Greg and Nancy, that are doing, they read a chapter a night and they've been doing a chapter a night. I mean, just things like that are just so cool to hear, as all of us being in the position that we are in this room, to see that happen is just it's very encouraging.
I love that. I mean, I know Sherry and I have never read Revelation nightly. I mean, that's there you go. That's awesome, Greg and Nancy. Well, on this, we do all things theological. Love. We sit here an hour before we even come on, and we talk about stuff and theological. The three of us love talking about Scripture and theology, but we're on Heaven, and we're going to go bam, 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 staccato fashion today to answer as many of your questions as we can. So, Laura, I'm going to start with you. First question.
Yeah, we had a few people ask about the timing of how this will work. There's kind of some different ideas in both different church doctrines, but also in movies, about how the timing will work. Some people have this idea that we're gonna be in sort of a state of rest until we all are resurrected or brought to heaven on the same day. Some people think that we go right away to wherever our final destination is. So thoughts on timing? How does this work?
Beetlejuice showed a waiting room. That's all I'm saying. If you just remember, there was that waiting room in Beetlejuice. So yes, movies form. I think about today you will be with me in paradise. There's an element there with the thief on the cross. Mm-hmm. In 2 Corinthians 5, where Paul says to be absent from the body is to be home with the Lord, and we desire that. So there's an immediacy with that. One of you want to talk a little bit about the machination of purgatory, that it was actually a created entity to raise money. It was a fundraiser. It was essentially a fundraiser. You could be there in the waiting room and be prayed out and bought out. Right?
Yeah, there's nothing biblical about it. I do think, as we've
There's nothing
I mean,
biblical about it.
which is
Let's just say that there's nothing biblical
a lot about the
it.
Catholic Church. There's nothing biblical about.
Yeah.
Saint is saints is plural, not singular. But anyway, I do think there's been, as I've said on here before, some of the idea of post-mortem, pre-resurrection, post-resurrection. You have to kind of define what the ground rules of what you're talking about. This is post-mortem, life after death. What happens in that paradise? I go to oftentimes sitting with a family, working through the funeral services. What questions do you have? Nothing's off limits. At what about where they are now or where we're going, what hope we have. And often it usually is where are they now? Where are they now? And so I always go to John 14, and in John 14 is manai paloi, which is like the if you survey that throughout extra biblical text, it's very fascinating. It's almost like a hostile type place. It's different from tapon, which he uses earlier on John 14. But manai is this it's this temporary dwelling place. It's not it has a transient notion to it. It's not a fixed place as in a home. But this is the place you'll go to have rest. And so in the idea I always use is like, I think life is a lot harder than we think it is when we become desensitized to how hard life is. And Jesus knows. He's our great nurse and our great and God's mother nature comes out into this healer of Jesus, that he restores us. It's this great to use the crude language, maybe rehab clinic in the sky, where we get to just have that rest, because and this might lead to further conversation we'll have down in the next 20 minutes or so, because the resurrection, life after death, is not just laying around sleeping, but it has a lot of sweat and a lot of work and a lot of fun.
Yeah. So Laura, what Austin's getting to is what happens. This is the question: is pre the 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 narrative of we will meet him in the air, the final consummation of history, and the symbol, the imagery there. A lot of the context of this, even this question, but it's more so a question coming up, is the fact that you're in the middle of this right now, having lost your mom and dad in the summer. What do you think? So where do you think Sheila and Tom are right now? What is as a theologian, but as also a grieving daughter?
Yeah, I think, we got so many questions that also connect to that, like that when we talked a little bit about it last week, like how much are people in heaven experiencing what we're going through here, and how can they know what we're really going through if they're not going to have sadness? So how could my parents be not sad knowing I'm back here grieving them, right? And a lot of people ask that in different forms. And I think again we go back to the reason we ask those questions is because our connections to each other do feel so strong and mysterious, and we are kind of given families to belong to, and so we're trying to sort out how eternal that is. And so my own way of working around some of that is just that they're where God wants them to be, and they're where their life led them. And I don't know how the mechanics of the timing work. One thought I had that we were talking about is that question people had about can they still be sad? And I think there's some kind of translation that happens between here and heaven. So let's getting really specific. Like, do my parents know I'm sad right now? And what I wonder is if I'm feeling sad, but what they translate that as is we were loved. And so wherever they are, what I'm feeling of grief and sadness and missing them, that what they're feeling is we were maybe loved even more than we understood. And as you guys know, when people are gone, sometimes you understand them in a different way than you did when they were alive. So I think maybe every time I understand my parents in a new way, they get like a ping, they get like a Google alert, like Laura just figured something out, and there's a little more grace in your relationship to her now.
Yeah, when you were talking about that earlier, I was thinking about the imagery of the tapestry with 1 Corinthians 13. We see through a glass dimly, then we'll know fully, even as we're fully known. And it doesn't mean omniscience. We're not going to be God. We're not going to know everything. but the tapestry imagery of the beautiful woven tapestry that on one side is like this jumbled mess of threads. And then when you turn it over, you see, oh, that's how all those threads come together. And I wonder if they're seeing how all the threads of your life that make no sense right now come together.
Yeah.
That they're able to see that. And when you were saying that earlier, when we were going through our preview, I was thinking of that. I was thinking, oh yeah, that's exactly. They may see the same thing you see, but they see the love in that, not the
Yeah.
the loss in that. And
yeah, and then maybe there's certain things that are easily shared language, right? So when I think the first time that I experienced real joy again, that they'll hear that will be
Yeah.
shared space for us.
Yeah.
So not the sadness necessarily, but the thing that's at the heart of that, which is love, which is goodness, which is joy, that is the shared language that goes back and forth where there's no need for translation.
Yeah, there's some Romans 8 in that. I think, as we become one with the Spirit becomes one with us, and there's an idea of interchangeability there that is in the Spirit can speak the language of your groans and translates them into heavenly things. That's what my mind goes to when you bring up that the idea of translating joy to grief, and that seems to be the business of God. It's taking that which goes into the ground, but making something new and green and lush out of it.
Yeah.
So concerning
next question, us.
I think this is more into some questions we didn't quite get to yesterday, which would be, how should you say, certain lines of salvation. To put it crudely, who gets in, who gets out, and this can go ways of someone who did not have as some might say, a conventional confession of faith and baptism before they passed, or that the public knew about, or it could go into ways of suicide, perhaps. But we had a question from I believe, is it Susan?
Yeah, the S got cut
Yeah.
off. Yeah.
So I understand heaven is terrific, but what if you're gay? How can my heavenly experience be complete without my daughter, who is a part of my heart, though I disagree with her lifestyle? We'll start with you, Dad. What's your first reaction?
Well, first of all, I am of the opinion that the absolute comprehensiveness of God's grace is beyond our understanding. So I'm not one of those who even gets close to a literal 144,000 in terms of, boy, there are many who enter into destruction, but very few find life. And some people look at that and say, well, very few go to heaven. That's actually not what Matthew 7 is talking about at all. It's not talking about heaven beyond. It's talking about life now. And so I'm not one to assume that someone's lifestyle that I don't agree with or something necessarily bars them. First of all, God's grace is amazing. And this also then gets into, Laura, your point about, I think in heaven, for the people who are asking, how could I be happy because my mom's not there? How could my mom be happy because I'm not there? I do believe that God is love. So when we are in heaven, we will recognize, oh, I thought that was my mom's love, but that was actually God's love. Oh my gosh. It was always God. It was always God. I didn't realize it. I thought it was my mom. I thought it was my dad. I thought it was my grandma. It was God the whole time. And I think it does get into that. I'm not saying that all dogs go to heaven. I'm not a universalist, but I want to be. And it's in, I can safely say, the bagazillions who are going to be in heaven. I would say, based on the fact that grace is beyond our understanding. God's love is just beyond understanding. This includes suicide. It includes a lot of issues. Laura, take that and bounce off of that and push back.
My first thought is Jesus tells so many stories that are about being real careful about who you say is in and who's out of the kingdom of heaven. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a field full of weeds and wheat, and guess what? You don't know. That's right. You're not the best judge of what's a weed and what's wheat. And I think that's just a good rule for all of us to live by. Like, we have to look for wisdom. We have to look for we have to sort out how to live our lives and how to follow Jesus. But I think we are cautioned over and over again in the stories of Jesus, um, to let time and let God work, and not be the ones who get to decide who's in and who's out.
Yeah, and I think with that, with those people that we think in our minds are out, to you, I'll bounce off that.
Yeah.
You, the people who thought they were in weren't, according
Right.
to Jesus, and the people they thought were out weren't out. And we're not on the judgment committee, we're on the love committee. And what I mean by that is the more I try to get people into heaven, the more I'm not loving them. That's the irony. I'm negotiating with their soul instead of just let's just love them. And I'm not certainly assuming that Susan's not loving her daughter. That's not what I'm implying at all. But I think we do, especially those of us in the Western binary way of thinking of salvation. I got to get them over the line. In our heritage, that was getting them dunked by 12. That's the magical age of accountability, is around 12. The really spiritually mature, it's maybe 10, right? Like there were those special kids. I don't know about you, Laura. You might have been at like me. I was like more like 14. It finally
I
got
held
it.
out till
Yeah, I was
grade,
the
yeah.
late bloomer spiritually. So, but the more we try to push heaven into people and people into heaven, the less we're now loving them. And I think that's the point of Matthew 7 is just love, right? Don't judge, just love and ask, seek, and knock, and have that kind of relationship with people. And
I think that lends you to letting the conversion. We don't convert people; the Spirit does,
yeah,
and
that's right.
that in your and by loving someone, you're creating space for heaven to exist in their life. I do think the only thing you have to deconstruct with that is that number one, gay being a lifestyle choice. That's something that I think you do have to kind of, maybe within that question, we do have to step back from a little bit. This is not necessarily a choice that people just decide to do, but it is something deeper. And it's, Matthew, I'd go Matthew 19 there. I do think another deconstruction you have to do within someone living, being created in such a way or living in such a lifestyle. The hope we have maybe as a mother there, Susan, for her to have, is I go to two passages. First, Romans 8, and that nothing will separate us from the love of our faithful Lord. And that is perhaps no bad doctrine and also no lifestyle that could have potentially come as a result of living in a corrupted order of things, to say the least. Now, in our life, there is a cacophony of things happening, and it is like a booming and raging orchestra. And I do think our Lord is so faithful that I hope and pray towards for such people who have made choices or not, that great orchestra dies out some point, and what's left is a single note, a single melody, a single player, and that is where John 10 comes into reality. That, oh my gosh, I know the voice of that shepherd. I've been hearing all these other things my whole life, but I know that voice. And at one final chance, the faithful Lord is able to do his work there. And so in Romans 8, I think what's played there is soteria, is in our language today, it's rescue. And it's not just salvation doctrinally and all that's shrouded behind it. It's a rescue operation. I don't think SEAL Team 6 goes into Taliban cave and just waits outside, and once they're there and says, now if you can get out of that what you're in, then you will save you. And they go in and they extract, they rescue. And I think rescuing doesn't just if all and over in Scripture we see rescuing happening in the temporal and in the celestial, and that's what the hope we hope to in that. And so if that gives any kind of comfort to you, Susan, as a mother.
Laura, you're next. Question. Thanks.
Yeah, we had a lot of people wondering about work. Will we get to work? We got that a lot. And it's like, will we have to work or get to work? Will we work in heaven? Will we have jobs to do? Yeah. And that's tied into the creation story too, right? There's an idea that they work without it being awful or feeling like toil sometimes.
Yeah.
Will we work? I think you answered that with the will be productive, but what do you think that'll look like?
We did. So his servants will serve him, chapter 22. And I think when you take that with Matthew 25 and we're reigning with him, we're managing, stewarding with him, with we'll be a kingdom of priests forever, that we're executing his plan for the healing of the nations. Yes, I do. I think we'll know our truest self, untainted by sin, in the word picture of Ephesians 2 that says we're a work of art, poema, that it's been restored. You'll know the fully restored reality of the vision God had for you, I believe, which will
Mm.
somewhat be a vocational expression. So I don't know if I'm going to be a preacher in heaven, because I'm not sure heaven really needs that many preachers. But
I have a few.
I'm curious if will there be meetings?
Oh gosh.
Because
Not where
it's
I'm
not
at.
just like the work of the
No,
hands.
Austin's not attending any.
Nope.
Is it a sin if you don't attend a heavenly meeting?
No, because here's what I'm thinking. Like, how fun would it be to be in a meeting where there's no bad ideas for one, but there's also nobody telling you your idea is bad, and meetings without ego
Mm.
is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Like, so one of the things that we talked about, right, is how thinking about heaven can make things true here, right? So to think
Mhm.
about what will it be like to work someday, what would it be like if your work today was more heavenly?
I think that's the
Um,
biblical idea of it. I think
yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
I think that's what don't toil in vain in 1 Corinthians 15:58, which we've talked about before. Galatians 6:9, do not become weary in doing good, but at the proper time reap a harvest if you do not give up. I think we read too much ministerially into Jesus's sowing and reaping parables. I think that those have much more eschatological emphasis, because he was heralding the kingdom. He wasn't just talking about ministry, in the sense that we read our ministry into it. It's about resurrection. It's about 1 Corinthians 3. I think is something that comes to mind. What we do here will matter there. A friend of mine is reading, dearest friend of mine is reading Surprised by Hope right now, and so we're having great conversation. And he's an unbelievable photographer, and so we're talking and we were talking about through some of those complexities of heaven, and we just had a wonderful conversation about, my gosh, can you imagine you're in charge of all these new colors, all these new images, all these new scenes. You're in charge of capturing that for people. Well, I think in creation, in not in this celestial geography that's disembodied soul Pixar thing, but in real time and in real bodies and real people, you're capturing this beauty. I think that's inherently tied to being in a kingdom of priests now, and cultivating and caring and creating goodness and showing that off. I think that's entirely what Paul is saying now.
Yeah.
Well, because it's also
Mhm.
tied to money, right? We had people ask about money, and I wonder it'll be work without fear of like there there not being enough.
Mhm.
It'll be
Mhm.
work without scarcity. Like, so we do so many decisions based on this fear that there's not enough of something. There's not enough attention. There's not enough power. There's not enough money. And what would work be like without all that fear and junk
Well, when
taken
you
out
think
of it?
about it, Laura, the imagery in Revelation it's most often used with regard to surrender is we'll lay our crowns before him, which is our accomplishments, our trophies, our sense of enoughness, and then he'll envelop all that. You may have just given the simplest description of heaven I've ever heard. It is the place of no ego. That that has such implications on
Mm.
everything.
It,
The
it,
place of no ego.
because I think what characterizes what you characterized yesterday in your message, and we have this far, and what the best thinkers of God do is in the biblical sense. So ego is like you're compensating for something you don't think's there, right? About
Mhm.
oneself, right?
Mhm.
You're about whether it's been misplaced or never been placed and found. But heaven is you think of Luke 10, not just in the defeat, don't rejoice, but rejoice in your names. You think of the dwellings, the places, and you think of the bodies that Paul talks about waiting for us. It's being named and being known. Like that's and so many people unfortunately go through life unknown. And that
Yeah.
what a terrible
Yeah.
evil that is, and not knowing their true name in some
Which
existential sense or real sense.
Mhm.
Um, in that, or never knowing someone of a miscarriage, but I think but an ego so often comes from not really knowing our place and our
Mhm. It
purpose.
does.
And so, yeah, you saying this eagle, this place, that is so much like you're going to a place where a real place where you're named and you're known. And
And you're fully enveloped in the one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of our ego happens out of our disconnection from the one who is our self. He is our, I always think, I bet I think 3 or 4 times a week about God saying to Abraham, I am your great reward, Abraham.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm the reward. It's not, you're going to have great tents.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have pools I'm your reward, and you're going to be enveloped into that. And I think that's what we'll never have known what it's like to be free until that minute, because we're always trying to strive.
Mm-hmm.
Oz, you're next. We've got 6 minutes to go through as many questions as possible before we
play. We have 6 minutes.
So let's just go up.
This is good for not having much time.
Okay.
Because
let's just go through it real
because
quick.
it involves time. Some people have problems with eternity. I mean, that's a pretty large concept to we haven't even broken down string theory yet into civilization, but how can we grasp eternity? Laura, you first. What do you think with this whole idea of
and
just
you have no time to talk about time, Laura. You have no time to talk about time.
You gotta, yeah.
I had a professor. School's all about professors trying to say weird things that mess with you the rest of your life. And I had a professor talk about how most of the way we talk about time is like it's finite or like it's money. Like we have all these phrases about how time is like money, wasting time, spending time, that our primary way we understand time is like counting it and we're going to run out of it. And he said, well, what if you change the metaphor, that instead of time being like money, time was like water you swim in? And I think what he was trying to get us to was this idea of forever. Like we're imagining that we're going to be watching the clock, that we're going to be marking the days, or that we only have so much time left. We're so accustomed to a finite life and to that feeling of panic that I think it's like describing New York to a baby. Like, how will it be to have those limits blown up? And I think that's what he was trying to say, is like, is there a way to live now where time is a thing you swim in instead of money you spend? So I just want to pass that along because it messes with my head all the time.
I love that.
But I love that.
Laura, you love messing with our heads. You love messing with our heads. Okay, Laura, next question. We have no time to answer, but we want to answer.
Well, somebody just came in hot with this, and I think we've already talked about it, but it's going around on the streets that Charlie doesn't believe in the rapture. So, Charlie, you want to say definitively how the rapture?
I don't believe in the Jerry LaHaye
is Kirk Cameron right?
Jenkins rapture. I
yeah,
believe
the
Jesus
real question here is Kirk Cameron right or is Charlie right? That's the real question.
Boy, I tell you, man, that's a tough one. Competition. I don't know where that comes from, other than I don't believe in pre-millennial rapturous, pre-tribulation. No, I don't. Do
like
I believe
the snatching of the bodies? Right?
Yeah, I don't believe
the clothes left in the plane.
I don't believe they're going to be pilotless airplanes.
I think one way to think about that maybe I haven't said yet, and I keep trying to share it simply.
Say it again, Oz, because it's
I just don't think a God of love and grace, who writes a profound book about heaven, coming up with a multitude of ways of coming here, all of a sudden just pulls the dinner cloth out from under us. I just don't. I think that if to put it really simply in kind of a logical sense, I think that's a good starting point of understanding harpazo and this thing that's a verb that we turn into a noun and and just like there's a lot of talk about mistranslation. There's a lot of wrong with all that, but I just don't think also that adds up. A God that just I understand thief in the night. I do understand all that.
Oz, did they miss how he would come the first time around? Is it possible that reading into the things we understand, we're missing how he's going to come the second time around? Well, I'll tell you this, we're not much different than they were. We tend to read through our own cultural lenses, our own interpretation very hardly, because it gives us a sense of definition and completion and assuredness, right? Assuredness. I just think it's possible that we'll miss how he's going to come the second time around. I'm not saying he's not coming.
And standing up against a literal stance of rapture premillennialism is not saying that we have it figured out.
No, that's
You're not
right.
saying
I
that
don't
at all.
need
We
to
don't
figure it out, though. That's the
exactly.
point. I don't need to figure it out. I trust the one who has it figured out. Laura, you got anything
Well, am
with
I
that?
answering?
Yeah.
No, I
Laura,
think.
hey, Laura,
What's
thumbs
happening?
up or
Are we
thumbs down
doing
on
something?
rapture? Thumbs up or thumbs down on rapture?
I think I love what you said though, right? They didn't understand Isaiah until Jesus showed up.
That's right.
Right. And
That's
so I
right.
think
And it
we're
was
not going to
all.
understand Paul
Yeah.
and a lot of that stuff.
Read the Road to
until
Emmaus. If
we're
you
further
Okay, we
along.
have time for one more. Who's got one question that has to be answered or it'll echo into eternity with great dissonance?
I'll make one up.
Okay, make one up.
I just wondered, you talked a little bit about the design of heaven yesterday. I just wonder for all of us, like, is there a place we picture that helps us get our head around all these big ideas we've talked about and doctrinal ideas? Is there a place on earth that we all go to in our head to get there?
A part
You
of
got
it
one?
is Hilton Head Beach for me, and that's not everything. Like the eternity for me is not sitting under my sun tent on a beach, but that is a part of it. Where I find I stop time, right? Time stops. What about you, Oz?
Well, I would. It's heaven is a community within the presence of God. So it's a church restored. It's a temple. When we talk about heaven, we're talking about Genesis 1 and 2. So I think whenever you have places of where you're in harmony with yourself, with what you're doing,
where is that place for you?
With other people and with God, that's well, for me,
it doesn't mean that Hilton Head Beach is going to be heaven. What it means is that place embodies your.
I mean, there's if you're fortunate, I think if you seek godliness, I think you have many places in your life, a multitude of places, and there's many in mine, thankfully, where I'm in harmony with
say one
myself.
Place. Just say
one place, Oz. Come on, man.
I mean,
you're going to get judged on this answer. Like somebody just said, Hilton Head, really? Hilton Head Beach,
I mean,
that's his answer.
In succession of a heavenly day for me, it would start out with 18-miler on an old rolling country roads.
Which is proof that one person's heaven is another person's
hearing
hell.
my breath and my footsteps, and the sun's out, and that would be in harmony with myself and who I am and what I'm doing.
Yep. Okay.
Laura,
Laura, yours has something to do with Archie the dog, I would imagine.
He's there. Yeah, I think, rivers are a big way for me. You mentioned that passage about the river going through the city. I love that picture. Rivers help me just get to a bigger picture. Also concerts. I think of concerts as that time where like I feel connected to the tapestry or the thread or the ocean or whatever. Concerts where everybody's singing the same song and excited to be there in the moment. That's when I don't look at my watch. That's when I don't look at the watch. Hey, just one last question that came in from Adam. If there's people I don't like on earth, will I like them in heaven?
I think so. You're going to have a new love capacity and they're going to be the best version of themselves. Let's just leave it there.
To exist into heaven is to exist as a genuine human being.
Yeah.
And so normally when people we don't like, we say they're not a genuine human being. But to exist in heaven is to be genuinely human, the way you're intended to be.
Yep. I've got so much I want to say on Laura's question. I wish we had time for that. We got to wrap up. Beginning next week, we're starting a series that you'll want to tune into called Christism and Atheism. And we're going to answer all your questions about why faith. And for a number of weeks, reality, truth, evil, human, hope, pain, morality, contradiction, science, meaning, existence, belief, love, beauty, death, sex, and happiness. And we're going to deal with that beginning next week. So we're excited. Laura, are you excited about that series? Oz, are you excited about that series? Yeah, we're excited. Next week, Levi's going to be sitting in my chair. So sit back.
Bring your questions.
And take it all in, people. Take it all in. You get the full Leviathan effect next week with Laura and Austin here on Weekend Hangover.
Reality.